The University of Lagos campus was buzzing with the kind of energy that only comes when a new semester begins, and everyone wants to show that they have upgraded their lives during the long holiday. Students were arriving in expensive cars, wearing designer clothes, and carrying the latest iPhones that their parents definitely did not buy for them. Among all these shining stars, there was one girl who stood out like a diamond in the middle of broken glass. Her name was Chidinma, and she was the undisputed queen of the entire campus. She was not just beautiful, she was the kind of beautiful that made other girls delete their own pictures after seeing hers online. Her skin was smooth and glowing like she bathed in milk and honey every single morning. Her hair was always laid to perfection, switching between expensive Brazilian bundles and perfectly installed lace wigs that cost more than a semester's tuition. She walked with a confidence that told everyone she knew exactly how valuable she was in this world. Chidinma's Instagram page was a shrine of luxury and envy, with over 50,000 followers who watched her every move like she was a celebrity. Every single post showed her living a life that other students could only dream about in their sleep. There were pictures of her at expensive restaurants on the island, eating meals that cost 20,000 naira for just one plate. There were videos of her stepping out of Range Rovers and G-Wagons, her heels clicking on marble floors of five-star hotels. Her comment section was always filled with crying emojis and comments like "God when," "This is the life I'm praying for," and "Sis, drop the secret formula please." She was everything that a struggling female student wished to become, and she wore her success like a crown that nobody could ever take from her head. Her boyfriend was the source of all this visible wealth and luxury that surrounded her like expensive perfume. His name was Kenneth, but everyone on campus called him Kenny Bucks because money followed him like a loyal shadow. He was a 26-year-old man who claimed to be into crypto trading and international business, but the students whispered a different story in the dark corners of the hostels. Some said he was a confirmed Yahoo boy who had clients in America and Europe sending him millions every single month. Others claimed his father was a big politician in Abuja who gave him unlimited access to government money that was meant for building roads and schools. Whatever the source of his wealth was, nobody could deny that Kenneth had money that seemed to have no end or limit. He drove 3 different exotic cars, changing them like ordinary people change their clothes. On Monday, it would be a white Benz. On Wednesday, a black Lexus Jeep. On Friday, a sleek BMW that made the entire campus stop and stare like they were watching a Nollywood movie. He wore gold chains so heavy that they looked like they could break his neck if he bent down too quickly. His wristwatch alone could pay the school fees of at least 10 students for a whole academic session. He was the kind of man that parents warned their daughters to avoid, but the same kind of man that every girl secretly wanted to be seen with because he represented success, power, and escape from poverty. Chidinma's roommate Ngozi was a quiet and serious girl from a humble village background who came to Lagos to study accounting and change her family's story. She shared the small, crowded room with Chidinma in Mormi Hall, and every single night she watched the drama unfold with worried eyes. While Chidinma was out living her best life in expensive clubs and hotels, Ngozi was bent over her textbooks under the dim yellow light of their rechargeable lamp, studying for exams and praying that her parents' sacrifices would not be in vain. She watched Chidinma come back to the hostel at 3 or 4 in the morning, smelling of expensive perfume and alcohol, her designer bags filled with bundles of crisp naira notes that Kenneth had given her for just being beautiful. Ngozi would try to talk sense into her roommate, reminding her that she came to school to get a degree and build a future, not to become a permanent girlfriend to a man whose source of wealth was as questionable as his intentions. But Chidinma would just laugh, a high-pitched sound filled with mockery and pride, telling Ngozi that she was too local and old-fashioned to understand how the modern world really worked. "Ngozi, you are still thinking like our grandmothers in the village," Chidinma would say while applying another layer of expensive makeup on her already perfect face. "This is Lagos, not some bush where people are still struggling to buy second-hand clothes from Katangua Market. If you have beauty, you must use it to secure your future before your body begins to sag, and the men move on to younger girls. Kenneth is my investment, and I am cashing out while my market value is still very high. Ngozi would shake her head sadly, knowing that her words were falling on deaf ears that only wanted to hear the sound of ATM machines dispensing fresh cash. She had seen this story play out many times before with different girls on campus who chased fast money and designer lifestyles, and the endings were never as sweet as the beginnings. But Chidinma was too blinded by the lights of the island to see the darkness that was hiding behind Kenneth's expensive smile. It was a cold Friday evening in the middle of November when everything began to change in a way that nobody could have predicted. Chidinma was in the room, applying makeup with the precision of a professional artist, while her phone kept buzzing with messages from Kenneth. She was preparing for what she called the opportunity of a lifetime, and her excitement was so strong that you could almost touch it with your bare hands. Kenneth had sent her a message that morning telling her about an exclusive party that was happening that night at a private estate in Lekki Phase 1. He told her that this was not an ordinary party for small boys and broke girls. This was an event for the real big boys of Lagos, the kind of men who owned oil wells and imported cars in bulk from overseas. Politicians, business moguls, and international socialites would all be there, and Kenneth wanted Chidinma to be his queen for the night. He promised her that after this party, her life would never be the same again, because she would meet connections that could set her up for life. Chidinma's hands were shaking with excitement as she read the message over and over again. This was her chance to move from being just a campus babe to becoming a real Lagos big girl who could afford to buy land and build her own house before graduation. She immediately went on a shopping spree, using the money Kenneth had sent her to buy a tight, sparkly red dress that hugged her body like a second skin. She bought new shoes with heels so high that walking felt like a dangerous sport. She got her nails done in gold and black, and her hair was styled in long, flowing curls that bounced whenever she moved her head. She looked like she had just stepped out of a music video, and she felt like a queen who was about to claim her throne in the kingdom of the rich and famous. As she was getting ready to leave, Ngozi sat up on her bed, her face filled with a deep concern that made her look older than her 20 years. She had been watching Chidinma's preparations all evening, and something in her spirit was seriously disturbed and uneasy. "Chidinma, I don't have a good feeling about this party," Ngozi said in a low voice that carried the weight of genuine fear. "You don't even know these people, and Kenneth has never taken you to meet any of his so-called big friends before. Why now? Why is he suddenly introducing you to his circle? What if something is not right about this whole thing?" Chidinma turned around sharply, her eyes flashing with irritation and anger. She was tired of Ngozi's constant warnings and negative energy that always tried to pour cold water on her burning ambitions. "Ngozi, I am begging you in the name of God, stop trying to jinx my blessings with your village mentality," she snapped, her voice rising with frustration. "You are always seeing danger and problems in everything because you are too scared to take risks and upgrade your life. Kenneth loves me, and he wants to show me off to his friends. That is what a real man does when he is proud of his woman. If you want to stay here and read your boring textbooks while your mates are enjoying life, that is your choice. But don't project your fears onto me because I am going to that party, and I am going to shine brighter than everyone there." She grabbed her expensive clutch bag, checked her makeup one last time in the small mirror, and strutted out of the room with her head held high like a model on a runway. Ngozi sat on the bed, her heart heavy with a dread that she could not explain or shake off. She whispered a quiet prayer, asking God to protect her stubborn friend from whatever darkness was waiting for her in Lekki. But Chidinma was already gone, her mind filled with dreams of champagne, luxury, and connections that would change her story forever. She had no idea that the door she was walking through tonight would be very difficult to walk back out of. The Uber that Kenneth sent to pick up Chidinma was not an ordinary car. It was a brand new black Mercedes-Benz with tinted windows so dark that you could not see who was sitting inside, even if you pressed your face against the glass. The driver was a tall man with tribal marks on his face and a serious expression that suggested he had seen things that would make most people run away screaming. He did not smile or greet her when she got into the car. He just nodded once and started driving toward the third mainland bridge, heading in the direction of the island where the rich people lived their expensive lives. As they crossed the bridge, Chidinma stared out of the window at the dark water below, her mind racing with excitement and anticipation. The lights of the island were getting brighter and brighter, looking like stars that had fallen from the sky and landed on the ground. She took several selfies, making sure her makeup was perfect, and posted them on her Instagram story with the caption, "Big girls only tonight. If you're not talking millions, don't even breathe near me." The comments started flooding in immediately, filled with jealous compliments and questions about where she was going and who she was with. She smiled with satisfaction, knowing that she was living the life that others could only watch from behind their phone screens. The driver turned into a very quiet street that was lined with tall palm trees and massive gates that hid the mansions of the super rich. He drove for another 10 minutes until they reached a gate that looked like it belonged to a fortress or a king's palace. The gate was made of black iron with gold decorations, and there were stern security guards standing on both sides with serious faces and walkie-talkies. The driver showed them a special pass, and the gates swung open slowly, revealing a long driveway that was lit with golden lights embedded in the ground. Chidinma's heart was pounding with excitement as the car moved forward, and she could see the mansion at the end of the driveway. It was the most beautiful building she had ever seen in her entire life, looking like something from a foreign movie. The house was painted in pure white with tall pillars and large windows that glowed with warm, inviting light. There were expensive cars parked everywhere, including Bentleys, Ferraris and Rolls-Royces that she had only seen in magazines and music videos. Beautiful women in designer dresses and men in custom-made suits were walking around with champagne glasses in their hands, laughing and talking in voices that dripped with wealth and confidence. This was the world she had been dreaming about, the world she believed she deserved to be part of. Kenneth was waiting for her at the entrance, looking like a prince in his black Gucci suit and diamond-studded watch that probably cost more than a house. He smiled when he saw her, his white teeth flashing in the golden light, and he stretched out his hand to help her out of the car like a true gentleman. "Baby girl, you look absolutely stunning tonight," he said, pulling her close and kissing her cheek while the other guests turned to look at them. "Welcome to the big leagues. Tonight, you are going to meet people who can change your entire life with just one phone call." Chidinma felt like she was walking on clouds as Kenneth led her into the mansion, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. The inside of the house was even more magnificent than the outside, with marble floors so shiny that she could see her reflection in them. There were golden chandeliers hanging from the high ceilings, casting a warm, expensive glow over everything. The walls were decorated with large paintings that looked like they belonged in a museum, and the furniture was the kind of luxury that most people only saw in home decor magazines. Soft music was playing in the background, and waiters in white uniforms were moving around with trays of champagne and small, fancy appetizers that looked too beautiful to eat. Chidinma grabbed a glass of champagne and took a long sip, feeling the bubbles dance on her tongue and the alcohol warm her chest. This was it. This was the life she was born to live. She was finally here in the midst of the elite, and she was never going back to her small, crowded hostel room and her boring lectures. Kenneth introduced her to several people, all of them older men with powerful auras and women who looked like they had just stepped out of fashion magazines. They smiled at her, their eyes scanning her body with an intensity that made her feel both powerful and slightly uncomfortable. But she pushed the uncomfortable feeling aside, reminding herself that this was just how rich people were. They were confident, direct, and unafraid to show their interest. As the night went on, the party moved from the main living room to a more private section of the mansion. Kenneth told her that the real VIPs were gathering in a special room for an exclusive session, and only the chosen few were allowed to enter. Chidinma felt a surge of pride, knowing that she was special enough to be included in this inner circle. He led her down a long hallway that seemed to stretch forever, past closed doors and dim lighting that made the place feel more like a maze than a house. With each step, the music from the main party grew fainter and fainter, until it was replaced by a strange, heavy silence that pressed against her ears. The air was getting colder, and she noticed that the lights in this part of the mansion were a deep, dark red instead of the warm gold from before. She tried to make a joke about it, but Kenneth just smiled and told her that the real luxury was always hidden from the public eye. They finally reached a large door at the end of the hallway, made of dark, heavy wood with strange carvings that looked like symbols from an ancient language. Kenneth knocked 3 times, and the door slowly creaked open, revealing a room that made Chidinma's blood run cold. The room was circular, with high walls painted in black and red. There were no windows, and the only light came from tall candles placed in a perfect circle on the floor. In the center of the circle was a raised platform covered with a white cloth, and around it were seated about 12 people, all of them staring at her with eyes that seemed to glow in the dim candlelight. The men and women were dressed in expensive clothes, but their faces were cold, empty, and devoid of any warmth or humanity. They looked like mannequins that had been dressed up to look alive. Chidinma's heart started to beat faster, and a cold sweat broke out on her forehead despite the chill in the air. Something was very, very wrong about this room. The smell hit her next, a thick, heavy scent of incense mixed with something metallic and rotten that made her stomach turn. She tried to take a step back, but Kenneth's hand tightened on her arm like a steel trap, his fingers digging into her skin hard enough to leave marks. "Kenneth, what is this place?" "I thought we were going to a party," she said, her voice shaking with the first real fear she had felt all night. "This doesn't look like a party. I want to leave. Please, let's go back to the main area." Kenneth's smile did not reach his eyes as he pulled her further into the room. The door behind them closed with a loud, final thud, and she heard the sound of a heavy lock clicking into place. Her heart was now pounding so hard that she could hear it in her ears, drowning out every other sound. "Chidinma, my beautiful queen, this is the party," Kenneth said, his voice now lacking the warmth and charm that had drawn her to him in the first place. "This is the real reason I brought you here. You see, all the money, the cars, the houses, the lifestyle you love so much. None of it came from crypto or my father's business. It came from this room. It came from rituals, sacrifices, and a deal I made with forces that are far more powerful than anything you can imagine." Chidinma felt like the ground was opening up beneath her feet, swallowing her into a dark pit that had no bottom. She looked around the room at the faces of the other people, and she realized with horror that some of them were girls she recognized from social media. Girls who used to post luxury pictures just like her, girls who suddenly went silent online and were never heard from again. They were sitting there with blank expressions, their eyes empty and lifeless, like dolls that had been drained of their souls. She tried to scream, but Kenneth clamped his hand over her mouth with a force that made her jaw ache. "Screaming won't help you, baby," he whispered into her ear, his breath hot and rancid against her skin. "These walls are soundproof and there is no one coming to save you. You wanted the big girl life, didn't you? You wanted money, fame, luxury, and all the things that come with it. Well, here is the price. Every year we need fresh energy, fresh beauty, fresh life to keep our wealth flowing. You, my dear Chidinma, are this year's offering. Your beauty, your youth, your life force will be transferred to us, and in return we will continue to live like kings and queens while you won't be needing that Instagram account anymore." The room seemed to spin around her as the full weight of his words sank into her mind like a heavy stone. She had been played. She had been groomed. She had been chosen not because Kenneth loved her, but because she was vain enough, hungry enough, and foolish enough to walk into this trap with her eyes wide open. All the designer bags, the expensive dinners, the luxury trips, they were all just bait to lure her to this moment, and she had fallen for it completely. The people in the room began to stand up slowly, moving toward her like zombies in a horror film. They were chanting something in a language she did not understand, their voices low and rhythmic like a funeral dirge. One of the women, an older lady with jewelry that looked like it cost millions, stepped forward holding a golden chalice filled with a dark, thick liquid that smelled like death itself. "Drink this, child," the woman said in a voice that sounded like it came from the grave. "It will make the transition easier for you. Fighting will only make it more painful." Chidinma shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face and ruining her perfect makeup. This could not be happening. This could not be real. She was supposed to be living her best life, not dying in a ritual circle for people who saw her as nothing more than fuel for their greed. With a sudden burst of desperate strength, she bit down hard on Kenneth's hand, tasting his blood in her mouth. He yelped and released her, and she bolted toward the door, her high heels making her stumble and nearly fall. She grabbed the door handle and pulled with all her might, but it would not budge. She pounded on the wood with her fists, screaming at the top of her lungs for someone, anyone, to help her. But the only response was the cold laughter of the people behind her. Kenneth grabbed her by her hair and dragged her back toward the center of the room, her scalp burning with pain as she clawed at his hands. "You stupid girl," he snarled, his handsome face now twisted with anger and cruelty. "Did you really think I loved you? Did you think I spent all that money on you because you were special? You are just a product, a sacrifice, a means to an end, and now you will serve your purpose whether you like it or not." They forced her onto the platform, and she felt hands, cold and strong, holding her down as she her vision, her expensive dress torn and dirty, her shoes abandoned somewhere in the chaos. She burst through the main entrance of the mansion and into the night air, gasping for breath and looking around wildly for help. The other guests from the party were still outside, but they seemed to be frozen in place, staring at her like they did not recognize her. She ran past them out of the compound and onto the dark street, not knowing where she was going but knowing that she had to get as far away from that place as possible. A taxi happened to be driving past, and she flagged it down with desperate, frantic waves. The driver, a kind-looking older man, took one look at her tear-streaked face and torn dress and immediately told her to get in without asking any questions. Please, please take me back to the mainland, she sobbed, her body shaking uncontrollably. Please, I need to go home. I need to go back to school. I need to see my mother. The driver nodded, his face filled with concern, and he drove as fast as he could back across the third mainland bridge. Chidinma looked out the window at the dark water below, and she realized how close she had come to never seeing this view again. How close she had come to becoming just another missing girl, just another Instagram account that suddenly went silent, just another cautionary tale that people would whisper about in the hostels. When she finally arrived back at the university, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She stumbled into Mormi Hall, her body exhausted and her mind broken by what she had just experienced. Ngozi was awake, packing the room with worry because Chidinma had not answered any of her calls all night. When she saw her roommate walk in looking like she had been through a war, she ran to her and held her tight as Chidinma collapsed into her arms, sobbing like a child. "You were right, Ngozi," Chidinma whispered through her tears, her voice hoarse from screaming. "You were right about everything. I almost died tonight. I almost became a sacrifice for people who saw me as nothing more than a product to be used and discarded. I was so foolish, so blinded by money and luxury that I walked straight into hell with my eyes wide open." Ngozi did not say, "I told you so." She just held her friend and let her cry, whispering prayers of thanksgiving that she had made it back alive. In the days that followed, the news broke that a massive fire had destroyed a mansion in Lekki Phase 1. The official report said it was an electrical fault. But the neighbors claimed they heard screams and saw strange lights coming from the house before it burned to the ground. Several bodies were found in the wreckage, burned beyond recognition, but the police could not explain why they all seemed to have died in the same room, or why there were strange symbols carved into the walls that survived the fire. Kenneth's body was identified by his expensive jewelry, and his family quietly buried him without a big funeral, knowing that the truth of how he died was too dark to ever be spoken out loud. Chidinma deleted all her social media accounts, threw away her designer clothes, and focused entirely on her studies. She went home to her village and fell on her knees before her mother, apologizing for laughing at her prayers and her anointing oil that had literally saved her life. Her mother held her and wept, thanking God that her daughter had been given a second chance that many others never received. Back on campus, Chidinma became a different person. She no longer chased luxury or big boys with questionable sources of wealth. She dressed simply, studied hard, and became known as the girl who had a testimony that she only shared with those who truly needed to hear it. Whenever she saw a young girl being lured by a man with too much money and too little explanation for it, she would pull them aside and tell them her story. She would tell them about the mansion, the ritual room, the empty eyes of the girls who never made it out. She would tell them that not every glamorous life is a blessed life, and that some prices are too high to pay no matter how good the reward looks. The legend of the campus queen who almost died in a ritual spread through the university like wildfire, serving as a warning to other girls who thought that beauty and ambition were enough to protect them from the darkness that hid behind wealth and power. People learned that the glitter of the island could easily become the prison of the grave, and that the fastest way to the top was often the fastest way to the bottom. In the end, Chidinma graduated with honors, got a good job through legitimate hard work, and built a life that was not funded by blood or curses. She never forgot the night she almost lost everything, and she made it her mission to warn others that true success is not measured by how much luxury you can display on Instagram, but by how much peace you have in your soul when you lay your head down to sleep at night. The elders in her village nodded in approval when they heard her story, saying that the ancestors had spared her because she still had a pure heart beneath all the vanity. They reminded the young ones that the old ways were not superstition, but wisdom passed down through generations who had seen the same traps in different disguises. And so, the story of the campus queen became a folktale, a modern parable told in universities, churches, and homes across Lagos. It was a reminder that not every door that opens is meant to be walked through, and that sometimes the greatest wealth is simply being alive to see another sunrise. Moral lesson: When a strange man's money is flowing like a river with no source, run fast before you become the sacrifice that feeds his wealth. Not every crown is meant for your head, and not every throne is built for your comfort. The price of fast money is often paid with slow death.